Thanks for tuning into Pressing Matters podcast. This episode will be talking about me, your host, A.M. Walker, also known as Alyssa, and my book Rooted in Silence. I'll be taking the time today to tell you about my story. I'll be telling you about my beginning, how I got started, how I kept going, and how I decided my book should end. It does look a little bit different today. Once again, you're not going to see me on screen. Things change pretty fast in a podcast, and we did have some changes in our guest order, which is totally fine. We do ask that you understand our flexibility with doing an audio-only version, and I hope that you enjoy the graphics on the screen. I try to include some trivia about me on the screen to help you connect to me as both an author and as a person. Regardless, I hope you enjoy my story. And here I go, telling you about how and why I wrote Rooted in Silence. I've always been a very visual person. My whole life, I've thought about doing something creative. It's incredibly hard to believe in yourself and think, I'm the person that can write a book. So it didn't start that way. I didn't start off and say, hey, I'm going to write a book and I'm going to create a company and make a podcast. I said, hey, I'm going to do something for fun and sit down and write because I genuinely enjoy it. And along the way, I found parts that I really struggled with. I loved the writing process. That was simple for me. But when it came to parts like finding a cover artist, a formatter, or somebody to help me edit my novel, I had no idea where to turn. I tried different websites and really just prayed that the reviews were accurate. A few times I was overly satisfied with my work, but I had a few hiccups. I realized that I wanted to be the indie author that not only wrote a book, but mastered and tackled some of the roadblocks that the rest of us face when it comes to publishing. So, Rooted in Silence is a book, which turned into a trilogy, which turned into having a prequel, and then eventually I opened my own indie publishing house. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's start with how I literally started. And that's that I just wanted a space to get things off of my mind. I'm a very creative thinker. I've always thought in kind of movies and I think of songs a lot of the time. I'm very visual and I love to be crafty. And I've always wanted to write a book. There's not many people that feel super confident to just say, I'm going to write a book and create a new revolution with indie publishing. And it definitely didn't start that way for me. So I started by just writing characters. I decided to write characters that kind of resonated with almost different sins that happen in the world. Volkova and Emily are pretty greedy and they have a lot of evil in them. The rest of the characters kind of represent normal people. Rooted in Silence is the story of a woman who really has no reason to want to murder her husband other than she's convinced herself that it's totally okay to do. The story is sort of like Dexter, where you're getting in the mind of a psychopath, but unfortunately, my character isn't really there to do great things. She has her eyes set on her fiancé because she really wants to be a widow. My book is not gory, it doesn't have blood, knives, guns, anything like that. But it does poke at the human mind and human spirit. What happens when we're thirsting for power and we're given it? What happens when we surround ourselves with people that are telling us our actions are okay when we know truly that they're not? And what happens when we let ourselves really dive into our deepest, darkest thoughts? It's not to say that I wrote a book assuming that everybody is a killer, but I wrote a book to show how even changing your inner thoughts can make you look at people in the world differently. My characters kind of think of people negatively, and it makes them a lot easier to be able to manipulate and harm. And that's the overlying message. But truly, the depth of the book has to do with Emily, who's hunting her husband. She wants him gone. She wants to be a widow, and she wants to wear that widow crown so everyone in the world will feel for her. It's super domestic, meaning that it's relatable, and there's not like fantasy or anything like that. It's a book that really could happen in real life, but of course it wouldn't because Emily would be stopped by the authorities pretty fast, right? But I sort of mean in the sense that nothing that she does is super unrealistic. So it's relatable. It feels like you're in a normal person's kitchen, but standing next to somebody who has some really strange inner thoughts. Throughout the book, Remy, who's Emily's husband, is pretty unsuspecting. He's honestly just a good guy, and he's Emily's husband and he's trying his best. But his best friend Matt sees more than Remy does, and he's starting to get his eye on Emily, and Emily feels it. She also has a neighbor, Miss Volkova, and Volkova is far too interested in Emily. She seems to kind of catch on to what she's doing, maybe not. Emily's not sure. But regardless, it almost feels like she's giving her permission along the way. My book has a lot of depth. I call it lyrical, and my writing is kind of similar to The Great Gatsby. I've been compared to quite a few different authors. One author I've been compared to is F. Scott Fitzgerald. It's not to say I wrote an amazing work like The Great Gatsby, but what people mean to say is that there are some parts that are very visual. There are some parts that are somewhat dry in the writing, and there's some parts that feel like you're shaping a movie in your mind. My book drives you forward, and I really worked on hitting on lyricism and creating a mental picture. I remember I was in the car with my husband, and I said, I'm going to write a book. This was about a year ago, and he was like, okay, honey, supporting my ideas, of course. But I didn't really have a plan, and so he was giving me the best support he could. And from that moment on, it felt like I had announced my next path in life. And I did it. And I sat and I wrote and I committed nearly every single day. I found a coffee shop that I loved. I went there with my dog. I would get my favorite coffee and I would sit down and I would write. And sometimes it was as simple as that, and finding joy in every day in writing. And by the end, I had a story and I couldn't believe it. When I first wrote my book, I wasn't even sure I had something. So I sent it to a few friends who were trying to tell me that I had something there. But of course, I had imposter syndrome and I started to think, hey, they're just trying to be nice. But the more I sent this off to people that didn't know me, the more feedback I got, and I thought maybe something's really here. What I did realize was that my ending was really heavy. I included a lot of information and I started to create kind of a second story. That's where I decided to create a trilogy. And I said, I want it to be one clean book where if somebody reads it, they can have that great experience. But if they want to dive deeper into the world, there will be a second and third book for them there. And they're already written. In fact, I will be getting my editing back from my editor on Friday for my second book, which I'm really excited about. But it didn't just all happen like that, and I want you all to understand that it just takes starting. That's what this is all about, is it's just about starting. I could sit here and I could talk to you about Rooted in Silence and how I sat on my couch, what type of coffee I ordered when I went to the coffee shop, and all the different details about my writing experience. And maybe that's interesting, maybe it's not. But my message today is just to encourage you to start. I can't believe that I wrote a book, now a second and a third, and a prequel. I have people rating me on Goodreads. I have an ARC team that I put together, and I've created a full-blown indie publishing house. Plus, I'm sitting here on a podcast. I do have a master's degree in communication, and that's because I've worked a portfolio career. For those that are unfamiliar, a portfolio career is where you don't typically just work a 9 to 5. I've worked a variety of different jobs. I've been a wedding planner, I've worked in the restaurant industry, I've been a traveling businesswoman. Heck, I even learned how to market potatoes for one of my previous jobs. I've traveled all around the United States, I've traveled internationally, I've spoken in almost 30 states and 2 countries. I've written with a variety of magazines. I've served on a number of boards, and I've always found a way to sustain myself. I think people are starting to recognize that there are different paths besides 9 to 5s, and I'm pretty proud of myself for being the type of person to really embrace that at a younger age. I did work a 9 to 5 up until I was 25 years old, and honestly, it just wasn't for me. It was not a financial problem. I was doing very well. I was great at the job, and honestly, they were pretty horrified when I left. But I didn't know how to explain at the time that it just wasn't for me, and I just was not feeling fulfilled. I have this knack in me where just going to an office from 9 to 5 or even working from home doesn't work. I have to go off of my creative spirit and go in these bursts. And honestly, that's really kept me successful. My book was no different. When I committed to it, I really committed. And sure, I didn't start off the bat getting a bunch of money from a company that said, here, write this book about this specific topic. Having a portfolio career doesn't mean that you haven't had a stable career. And I have had a variety of experiences. So I'm here to say that I'm somebody that you could look at as an example that you don't have to follow the formula. And that has to do with authors too. Do not go into writing a book thinking, I'm going to be a bestseller and get somebody to buy my book, but instead say, I'm going to put the most amount of effort into my writing that makes me happy, and I'll find the right people along the way. When I was creating my ARC team, I had no problem finding people, and I created a pretty large ARC team because it was hard to limit people. That's all to say, if your heart's in the right place, I truly promise you, you will be successful as an author. So don't treat your book like a 9 to 5. Treat it like a portfolio career. If you have to go out and explore and ask more questions, find experts to answer questions in your book. Maybe you have a court case that's involved in your book. Go sit in an open public court and see how it runs. If your book involves politicians, call your local politician and ask them questions. You literally never know what experiences are going to help you. When I was writing my book, I channeled back so many thoughts, experiences, careers, jobs, shifts, people, and lifestyle changes that truly drove me to write a relatable book to a wide audience. Had I stayed in that traveling business job my whole life and done something that made me unhappy, I would not be sitting here today talking to you on a podcast. And I do want to say, I recognize my privilege. Not everybody has the ability to just change their life like me. But the takeaway message is that you can make it work for you. Even if you have a family, even if you're busy, find joy in writing. If you don't find the joy in your writing, you're not going to write a successful book. When it came to my book, I truly just fell in love with the process. And so people ask me about the process, and it's really hard for me to answer because it's almost a blur. I just loved it. I sat and I wrote and I wrote and I developed, and it was just an immersive experience. It was really easy for me to write the end of my book because I had a sequel, so I kind of knew how the story had to transition. But before I did that, I will have to say I have a new love and appreciation for authors making any kind of ending of a book, and I will definitely be less harsh going forward because, man, that's a hard experience. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope that you got something out of this, and once again, the goal of Pressing Matters is to always enhance your own writing. Hopefully, you got something to relate to, inspire you, encourage you, or if you disagree with anything that I said, go ahead and comment it in the comments, and I'd love to talk about it. This is a space where we should all learn and grow together. So if you'd like to know more specifically about my book, Rooted in Silence, I'm happy to talk about it. But hopefully, today, this episode, where I centered more on our shared journey, was what you were looking for. I'm going to do some shout outs, and then we'll go ahead and call it a close. Thank you so much for joining me today. Pressing Matters does shoutouts on our podcast to different profiles on Instagram that either inspire, uplift, or encourage us. We would love to give 3 shoutouts today. We encourage you to go follow these accounts and give them some love. Thank them for being community leaders on Instagram. First, we have Leah at Lovely Leah Marie. Second, we have Crystal at Crystals Reads. And third, we have Diana at D's Book Adventures. There's some spelling changes and underlines, so make sure that you check out the caption or the screen to get the correct username spelling. Thanks everyone for being a part of our podcast, and thanks for these 3 for always making an impression on us at Pressing Matters Podcast. Have a great day, and we'll see you on Friday to meet up with Trevor Jackson to talk about his book, The Popperfield.